So this is your first video lesson back from break, and I hope you all had a wonderful break. It was good to see you guys back today. This video lesson is on properties of numbers. So we're going to learn about 4 different properties. You've probably have heard of them before. You probably don't remember what they are because they kind of have complicated names, and I'm hopefully going to teach you some ways that you can easily remember these properties when you come across them in math. Now, in the next few weeks, we're going to get more and more into algebra, and you're going to hear a lot of algebra terms like expressions and simplifying expressions and all kinds of algebra terms. Bear with us, try and memorize them, try and get to know them as best as you can. These properties are going to be really, really important the next 3 years of math. So this year, next year, and when you get into algebra as a freshman. So the better you learn them now, the better off you'll be. We're going to start with the first one. It is the commutative property of, we have multiplication and addition. So we're going to start with the commutative property of addition. And the commutative property of addition says you can add numbers in any order. So it doesn't matter the order that you add them in. So I'm going to say 3 plus 5 is equal to 5 plus 3. Any order that you add, that's going to be 8, and that's going to be 8. It doesn't matter the order. In algebra, we write this as A plus B is equal to B plus A. So in algebra, we use letters to represent the rule or the property. There's also the commutative property of multiplication. Similar, it says you can multiply numbers in any order. So I'm going to say 3 times 5, which is 15, is equal to 5 times 3. It doesn't matter the order. So we can say A times B is equal to B times A. And again, that's just a mathematical way to write that. Now, here's how you're going to remember the commutative property. Well, being out in the hills, and a lot of you don't live in neighborhoods, but think of a neighborhood, okay? A neighborhood is often your community, or where we live is our community. So you have neighbors, even though you may not be in a neighborhood. And your community, or your neighborhood, you and your neighbor, no matter which order you are in, you're still neighbors. So even if you and your neighbor switched houses, you'd still be neighbors. You'd still be in the same community, and you'd still be neighbors. So the order doesn't matter. So we're going to remember that by here's house A plus house B is equal to house B and house A. So your community is your neighborhood, and that's supposed to remind you that no matter which houses you and your neighbor are in, even if you switched houses, you'd still be neighbors. So that's kind of how you're going to remember the commutative property. Think of neighbors. Order doesn't matter. All right, the next one. This is the associative property, and we have the associative property of addition again. And this says when you add, you can group the numbers together in any order. So an example would be 2 plus 5 plus 3 is equal to, the order has to stay the same. So we have 2 plus 5 plus 3. So what I did is I just moved my parentheses, 2, 5, 3, 2, 5, 3. The order stays the same, I just switched around my parentheses. And we know that order of operations, we do parentheses first. So if I did 5 plus 3 is 8, plus 2 is 10. 5 plus 2 is 7, plus 3 is 10. It doesn't matter the order that it doesn't matter where the parentheses are when we're adding. The associative property says I can put those parentheses wherever I want. Okay? So you can have the parentheses. So if I chose to do this mathematically or algebraically using letters, I'd say A plus B plus C in parentheses is equal to, in parentheses, A plus B plus C. Okay, so that would be the algebraic way of writing that. Now we also have the associative property of multiplication. And this says when you multiply, you can group the numbers together in any order. So I could say 7 times 5 times 2 is equal to 7 times, that's 7 times 5 times 2. Now, parentheses first, 7 times 5 is 35, times 2 is 70. Here, in parentheses first, 5 times 2 is 10, times 7 is 70. So either way, you get the same answer. So it doesn't matter where the parentheses are, but following order of operations, we're going to get the same answer either way. So that's the associative property of multiplication. And algebraically, I can represent that A times B times C is equal to, oh, no parentheses there. We moved the parentheses. A times, in parentheses, B times C. All right. And the way that you're going to remember this is who you associate yourself with, associative property, there's a root word there, associate. So whoever you associate yourself with, I think of as your group of friends. So think of the lunchroom, whoever you sit with, your group of friends, or who you spend time with on the weekends or after school, that's who you associate with. That's your group of friends. So when you think of the associative property, think of that's when you have your parentheses or your groupings. So you can just draw a picture of you and your friend and put parentheses and say group of friends. So whoever you group yourself with, you associate yourself with is the associative property. So if you ever see parentheses, grouping, and the groupings have changed, you know that that's the associative property. If you see addition, it's of addition. If you see multiplication, it's of multiplication. Oops. All right, the identity property, this one's super easy, but it can get a little bit confusing. Identity property of addition, so we have addition again. Identity property, your identities, if you look in the mirror, your identity, that's who you are, okay? So the identity stays the same. So for addition, it's the sum of 0 and any number is that number. So 7 plus 0 equals 7. The identity of 7 doesn't change when you add it to 0. So the identity property of addition is any number plus 0 equals that number. So we'll say A plus 0 equals A. A stays A, doesn't change. When you add 0 to something, it doesn't change. So the identity property of multiplication, this is one that's different. If I multiplied by 0, I get 0. I wouldn't get the same identity. So A times 0 would give me 0. So the identity property of multiplication is how do you know, or how can a number stay the same when you're multiplying? What do you have to multiply by? Think about that. Hopefully you found the answer. The product, because we're multiplying, of 1 and any number is that number. So 7 times 1 equals 7. So when we're doing the identity property of multiplication, we use 1. The identity property of addition is 0, because any number plus 0 equals that number. But any number times 1 gives you that same number. So you want to keep it same identity. I want to get 7 when I have 7. So we can say that A times 1 equals A. And that's mathematically how we would write that. All right, so switch over to the back. Let's see, the very last one is called the distributive property. And this is going to help you with mental math. So those of you in mental math, when you're like, how do people keep getting these answers? I can't get these answers. Here's a little trick that might help you. So if I said, okay, mental math, number 1, do 7 times 15. You're probably sitting there thinking, okay, I can't do 7 times 15, or you do 15 times 7, and you try and do that in your head. That can get a little bit tricky. Here's a little hint or a way that can help you to know what to do. 7 times 15 is the same thing. Here's where the distributive property comes into play. 7 times 15 is the same thing as 7 times, I'm going to break apart 15 into 2 numbers to add them together. That's an easy number to multiply by. So I'm going to say this is the same thing as 7 times the quantity 10 plus 5. Because order of operations tells me to add 10 and 5, which gives me 15, and then multiply. But here's how the distributive property can help you. I'm going to take 7 and I'm going to distribute it to each of the numbers within the parentheses. Okay? Notice if I have a number right next to parentheses, that means to multiply. So I'm going to multiply 7 times 10, which gives me 70. And I'm going to multiply 7 plus 5, and I just bring down the sign. 7 times 5, which is 35. Now I can add 70 and 35 pretty easy in my head. 70 and 30 would give me 100, and then add on the 5 would be 105. Okay? So I broke apart 15, and now I can do that in my head, and I can get 105. Let's check our work. 7 times 5 is 35. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 3 is 10, so we get 105, and there's our check. Okay? Here's another example. If I said mental math number 2, 5 times 23, you'd probably sit there and think, oh, I don't know, I can't do 5 times 23 in my head. But if I break this apart to 5 times 20 plus 3, then I can use the distributive property to get an answer. So I'm going to distribute 5 to each of these numbers. Again, a number and a parenthesis means to multiply. So 5 times 20, we'll think of 5 times 2 is 10, add on another 0. I get 100. So 5 times 20 is 100. And then, keep the same sign, adding 5 plus 3 is 15. So I add 15. Well, that's easy. 100 plus 15 is 115. Now I can check it. 5 times 23. Here's 23 times 5. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 2 is 10 plus 1 is 115. So a check.